this is Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline.
Yes.
And I'm your host, Monica Hadley, and with me is my co-host and wonderful mother, Caroline Kilborn.
Well, thank you. It's a beautiful day, and it's great because it's raining south of us really hard and going to be flooding down there, so we're most fortunate here.
All right. I don't know. I'm not sure your volume is too good. Try again, Mom.
Okay. No?
Yeah, there's...
volume.
Here we go.
No. She taps it and it's on. Okay. And once again, it's a beautiful day.
It is a beautiful day. So who do we have up first, Mom?
Well, first we have, the book is called An Atlas of Countries That Don't Exist, and it's fantastic. Nick Middleton is the researcher of all this, and I don't know how in the world he did it, but it's a fascinating book because these countries have been and gone, and some of them not that long ago. You think, oh well, in the past, but no. So anyway, okay, something about him. He's a geographer, writer, and presenter of television documentaries. I can believe that. He teaches at Oxford University, where he is a fellow of St. Anne's College. A Royal Geographical Society award-winning author, he works, teaches, and communicates on a wide variety of geographical, travel, and environmental issues for a broad range of audiences, from policymakers to primary school children. And this book is fascinating.
Welcome to Writers' Voices, Nick.
Hello, nice to be with you.
Okay, I'm going to hold you as close. We also had some technical difficulties. Well, on Nick's end, his phone went out, and so we're trying to do this via Skype. And okay, so tell us, Nick, what gave you the idea to write this book?
A couple of inspirations. A few years ago, 3 years ago, I was reading an English classic of children's literature to my then 7-year-old daughter, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, which all takes place in an imaginary land behind the back of a wardrobe in an English country house. And we both really enjoyed the story, and it got me thinking about countries that might be unnoticed in some way. And then a few months later, I met someone from the Isle of Man, which is a small island between England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. And it's an oddity because in many ways it's an independent nation, because they issue their own passports, they make their own laws, they raise their own taxes, and yet their foreign policy and defence are run from Westminster here in UK. And when I looked into the Isle of Man, it turns out that they have the world's oldest continuously operating parliament, going back to the 8th century.
Oh my goodness.
So they've been running their own affairs very ever since, and yet they're sort of under the umbrella of the UK, but they're not a member of the UK, they're not a member of the European Union. And once I started digging into these sort of other types of place, I was amazed at how many there are out there. And there are 50 countries that don't exist.
And what was the criteria that you actually used for inclusion in this book? Hello?
Oh, did we lose him?
I don't know. Nick, are you there? All right, we're going to try this again. And in the meantime, Mom, why don't you talk a little bit about some of the countries that are in there?
This one is interesting. I started out and I thought, well, this is interesting. Well, the next one, well, that's interesting. The next one, yeah, that's interesting too. It just kept going. But this one was the Cyprus. Now, Cyprus is off the coast of Syria. It's south of Turkey. It's in the Mediterranean Sea, and it was once a great resort. I mean, a tremendous resort area. But then something happened, and it got. Let's see. The Turkish soldiers approached. Residents of this Greek Cypriot seaside town fled in their bell-bottom trousers, hastily packed bags under their arms, and then they left behind a thriving Mediterranean resort. the best beach on Cyprus, a glitzy playground for the rich and famous. After years of feuding between the island's two communities led to a coup that, inspired by Greece's ruling military junta, Turkish troops occupied the northeastern part of the island. One side talked of liberation by Turkey, the other called it an invasion. I mean, it was one of those deals where, and now the resort just lies there. There's nothing going on.
All right, I think we've got Nick back. Are you with us?
Nope.
Hello, are you there?
I am with you. I can hear you better.
Okay, all right. I don't know.
Lots of these would-be countries out there. This book has 50 of them. I could have filled it several times over.
Really?
Oh my gosh.
Wow. So what criteria did you use to decide what to include?
So they all have a permanent population, some form of government, a claim to territory.
Oh no, we lost him again. For some reason, it's cutting out. Can you hear us?
Okay, let's talk about Lakota. Now, Lakota is
There
he is.
Just up the road from you guys. It's a sorry tale of the Lakota Sioux, who signed a treaty with your government in the 1860s, which under the treaty it gave them all rights to their traditional lands, which are the Black Hills.
Mm-hmm.
But sadly, gold was discovered in them Dar Hills a few years later, and all bets were up.
Yeah.
But the Lakota, because the Black Hills are a sacred territory to these people, they fought for it, and both on the battlefield and subsequently in the law courts, and they were awarded compensation backdated to 1868. It's now worth more than $500 million.
Wow.
Yeah.
They won't take it.
No.
They want their land back, please. Sadly, not going to get it.
Wow. So we are having a little bit of technical difficulty, and so most of that we could hear, but so they've been offered, or they won compensation for the land, but they won't take it. Wow.
No, so
yeah, that's right. They won't take it because they say, well, we'll just have our land back. Thank you very much. You stole it. It wasn't for sale. So give us our land back. Needless to say that the US government hasn't given them their land back, and they actually unilaterally withdrew from the treaty as well in 2000 with sovereignty. So it's a large slab of the United States of America.
Wow.
And these people could do with the money because they're very religious. No, that land was not for sale.
Whoa.
Yeah, they
quite a number of these examples are sad in that sort of sense. There's small groups of people who are being bullied by larger groups and nation-state government. Not all, but many of them are quite sad stories, I fear. Mm-hmm. Some of them are a bit mad. Some of them are downright bizarre. It's a whole collection.
All right, well, give me an example of one that you would consider a bit mad.
Well, there's an island in the Caribbean, not that far from here, called Redonda, which was first discovered by Christopher Columbus. It's not a very big island, and first sighted in the 15th century. Anyway, no one lived there, and a trader from nearby Montserrat decided that he was going to own this island because it was up for grabs, as it were. And he declared himself to be the king of Redonda. He passed on his crown to his son, who actually was a
Oh.
All right, we lost audio there for a moment, but I think he'll be back. There we go. So, Nick, we couldn't hear from the point where you said he passed it on to his son. You want to pick up there?
Okay, yes. His son was quite a well-known fictional writer and made a fair amount of money. Decided he didn't want to live in the Caribbean, if you can believe such a thing. So he moved to England. And when he one of his best known works was called The Purple Cloud, which was filmed in Hollywood, a film called The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, starred Harry Belafonte.
Whoa.
Hollywood B movie. Anyway, this guy, MP Shield, passed on his crown to his literary executor, who was a pretty poor poet. Poor, both not a very good poet, but also economically poor. And this guy started selling aristocratic titles from a pub in North London, if you believe such thing.
That's pretty clever.
To the extent whereby now Redonda still has a resident population of 0, but there are no fewer than 9 kings who all claim the throne to Redonda.
Whoa.
And some of them issue postage stamps. They all have flags. Some of them issue their own currency, but no one lives on Redonda.
Okay. So what?
It's one of those.
Oh, dear.
I guess it's just bragging rights they get, huh?
Yeah, not far off. Well, they get to call themselves king, which is there's a certain ring to it.
Well, now, it would have made more sense to just sell off dukedoms, right?
Yeah. Oh, he did that too. He did the whole dukedoms, all sorts of noble titles to senior celebrities of the day, people like Dorothy Sayers, who was a famous fictional writer, Henry Miller, Dylan Thomas, J.B. Priestley. They were all given noble titles. And there was a story that actually, if you found this guy, his name was John Gorsworth, a very minor poet. If you bought him a drink at the Alma Tavern in Westbourne Grove in North London, at lunchtime he'd give you an aristocratic title written on the back of a beer mat.
Wow.
How did you find out about that?
How did I find out?
Yes, how did you find out about that?
The Redonda example I found in an academic paper about sovereignty. I've used all sorts of sources for this book. So some academic papers, some books, old newsreels. Some of these more contemporary examples have their own websites. I've used oral histories, you name it. I've used all sorts of sources to gather together the information for this book.
It's amazing.
How long did it take you to gather all that information?
I suppose once I started seriously doing it, about 4, 5, 6 months.
Wow.
Oh my gosh!
And that was full time. You were working on it full time.
No, yeah, not far off full time. I suppose.
Wow.
Probably 4 months. 4 months full time, because I also had to brief the designer to draw the maps, and I expect if you've seen a copy of the book,
we do.
It's beautifully designed.
Oh yes.
Oh, it is fascinating.
Shall I just describe it briefly
for
listeners?
Yes, please.
So each non-country has 4 pages, and you have the first 2 pages with the name and a few details like the capital and the population, and then the right-hand page, as you look at it, has a hole in it, a cutout in the shape of the non-country, and so you can see it, and you think, well, what's that then? Because it's not a very familiar shape, and it's a tease, because once you turn over, you then see the outline of this country surrounded by countries, the names of which you probably do know, so you see it in context. So that's the whole idea of this, is that we're all familiar with the political map of the world, which shows every square inch of the world's land surface carved up between countries, but there are all these other shadowy countries that never get a look in, which are there, but you're not supposed to.
Nick, do you think that any of the countries in this book will someday become recognized and take their place as nations?
That's a key question, isn't it? And I think of all of them, the most likely is Greenland.
Yes, I was just going to talk about that a minute. We think of Greenland as being a country.
Yeah, well, it's been a Danish colony. It's part of Denmark for nearly 300 years. But the Danes in recent times have been ceding a bit of the power, and Greenland got home rule in 1979 and then self-rule in 2009. They all get a bit more self-governance. And many people believe that Greenland is on course. The next stop is full independence. And there's a key date coming up. 2021 is the 300th anniversary of Danish colonial rule, and that would be an extremely auspicious year in which to give full sovereignty back to Greenland.
Right. I guess we don't realize how many countries own other bits of land, that they colonized.
There you are.
Yeah.
Another thing that's fascinating to me is how much the political map has changed in my lifetime.
Yeah, exactly so. I mean, you think about it, those of your listeners who remember the Soviet Union as was,
Right.
which isn't that long ago.
No.
When it disintegrated, it created 15 new countries.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go, 1990s was a real phase. So some countries broke into, Czechoslovakia became Czech Republic and Slovakia. Ethiopia lost the Red Sea coast to Eritrea. And then conversely, other countries became reunited. East and West Germany became one in 1990. Likewise, North and South Yemen got together. But there have been many more new countries in the last 50 years or so than there have countries being lost. And so in this century, we've had East Timor, Montenegro, South Sudan. So you're right, there's been a definite trend towards more fragmentation in recent years.
I had a friend who told me she was going on a trip to Montenegro, and I'm like, that's a country? I had no idea.
Yeah, there you are. There you are.
And
They're
yet,
out there, these places.
Yeah.
And many of them have got sort of degrees of recognition. Recognition by other countries is like a gold standard. That's what they all want, to the extent whereby some non-countries have set up their own, like, equivalents of the United Nations, the UN, which is the unrepresented United Nation,
so there's
which has about 13 members.
There's a United Nations of non-nations.
Yeah, exactly so, exactly.
Wow.
We hear a lot about the Crimea, and that's one of these countries that you have here, and there's 2 million people population, so that's it's quite a bit.
Yeah,
some of them are still territory terms that are so in population.
In a country like that, or a non-country like that, how were you familiar with kind of the history of those sort of things before you started, or did you really learn a lot?
Yeah, in many cases, I'm a geographer. It sort of is my business. But yes, in many cases, I was aware of the history of Crimea, for example, which is one of those situations where, and this is quite a common tactic, a big country decides it wants a bit of territory, so it moves out the indigenous population. So in Crimea, in the case of Crimea, Stalin deported most of the Crimean Tatars in the early 20th century and flooded the place with Russians. Likewise, Western Sahara, the Moroccans. It's a classic tactic. So yes, in many cases I was aware of the history, but there are other places that are in this book that I was unfamiliar with, so I learned material too.
So are some of the countries in here, the population of that country isn't actually living in the geographic location that they're claiming as their country?
Yeah, in the case of Western Sahara, that is definitely the case. Western Sahara is an old Spanish colony in West Africa, and most of its population lives in refugee camps in Algeria, the neighboring country, because they've been cleared out by the Moroccans who occupied it after the Spanish left. And the reason is, and again this is quite a common situation, the reason is it's full of things other people want, in this case phosphates, which were very widely used for agriculture, and rich fishing grounds offshore. So virtually the entire indigenous population lives outside its territory.
I wonder at what point people decide that where they came from or where their ancestors came from isn't home anymore, and where they are now becomes home in those kind of situations, in a refugee situation. It's, sometimes we think, well, wouldn't it be nice if everybody got their country back? But it would be an unending, game, wouldn't it?
That's what a lot of the established countries are afraid of. That's why they won't readily recognize many of these non-countries, because you're right, it's a so-called floodgates argument. Once you recognize one, there'll be a flood of others, and in many cases there are very strong arguments in favor of recognizing some of these non-countries, but that's what holds back the more established countries from recognizing them, because they're afraid of where it's going to stop.
In the case of Taiwan, that, of course, was Second World War. There was the Chinese nationalists lost the Civil War and fled to the mainland, and they took up residence on the island that is Taiwan as Republic of China. And they are both part of the same country, and the country is China. But how that works with two separate governments, one in Beijing and another in Taipei, or P, I don't know how you pronounce that. They call it the two China problem. So it's been going on for a long time. And that
too right, it has. Many decades. And everyone just pretends that there's one China, but of course in reality there are two, as you say. There's mainland China and there's Taiwan. But it's quite an interesting example, because one might think that you think to yourself, well, what is a country? You might think that if you're a member of the United Nations, that's it. It's the gold standard, because it's a club that's only for sovereign states. And yet Taiwan's a very interesting example, because it was a member of the United Nations until the early 70s, and then it was kicked out. So there's only one Chinese seat in the United Nations. Taiwan had it, and then all the other countries said, oh, well, actually, sorry, we're going to give it to mainland China now. So Taiwan has this strange characteristic of being recognized by very few countries, including your own. The US doesn't recognize Taiwan as a country, neither does the UK. And yet, in practice, it behaves like a country. It's got its own government, a democratically elected government, its own rather large economy. It's a really strange thing. Once you start digging, I've been fascinated by the fact that there's no one universally accepted definition of a country. And when you start any of the criteria that you try and use, there are always exceptions and anomalies. And you're quite right. Taiwan is one of those.
And it would seem like such a simple thing, what a country is.
It should be, shouldn't it?
It should be. It should be.
But it's not.
You're listening to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline, and our guest today is Nick Middleton, and the author of An Atlas of Countries That Don't Exist, a compendium of 50 unrecognized and largely unnoticed states. Of course, Taiwan isn't one of the unnoticed ones, but a lot of them are things that you have never heard of. And this is published by Chronicle Books, which is one of our favorite publishers. They do such an amazing job, don't they?
They do. It's a beautiful book.
It is. I want to ask you, do you have plans to do more research and write, or use research you've already done and write another book?
I've written many books. This is just about my 20th odd book. Yes, there are other books in the pipeline. Many of them are ideas in my head. I haven't started writing a new one yet, but there are a couple of ideas that will see the light of day not too far off, distantly in the future.
Now, I know that some of our Chronicle book authors that are from the UK had published with a different publisher in the UK and then in the US with Chronicle. Is that how you did it?
Yes, no. Chronicle have bought the US, the North American rights to the book that was published a couple of years ago here in the UK by Macmillan. But that's the way the publishing industry works.
Right.
You sell foreign rights.
And does the book look the same, or does it look completely different in the U.S. version?
Very, very similar.
Very similar.
Well, see, what I like about this is on this front page, it tells you the capital, the population, and the area that it occupies, where it is, and the language it's spoken there, which I think is, you can get a lot of history in a very small space there.
Exactly so. And then you flip over and you see it on a map in context, and there's a little story, a sort of vignette from its history.
Right.
Well, Nick, in the few minutes we have left, would you like to read one of the vignettes for us?
Yes. Do you want to choose one, or shall I just...
You go ahead. Whatever comes to mind.
Okay. Here we go. This is about Tibet, a non-country that you probably know about.
Yes, I was wondering about that.
Nobody crossed the mountain pass in winter. The snow was too deep. But this was an emergency, so every man and woman in the village worked through the night to clear the way for his escape route. It was March, the 3rd Tibetan lunar month, 1959. His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama had left Lhasa in secret more than a week earlier. As the Chinese People's Liberation Army began firing artillery shells at his palace, he rode away on a horse under cover of darkness. China's official explanation was that he had been kidnapped by bandits. Following a course prescribed by an oracle, His Holiness arrived in the village of Sona, dressed in a brown knitted cap and wearing dark glasses against the snow glare. He spent the night in the village monastery, where strings of coloured prayer flags stretched from the compound's mud walls up to the biscuit-coloured cliffs behind. He conducted evening prayers and meditation among the flickering yak butter lamps and old silk wall hangings, while outside, high in the pass, the villagers stamped the snow down so the horses could cross. A half-moon was floating in a perfect blue sky when he departed the next morning, the residents of Sona following his entourage saying prayers as they went. The perpetual parade moved in a constant hum generated by the muttering of mantras. People living along the wayside emerged from their homes to make prostrations as the horses struggled past. The route over the Himalayan mountains was precipitous and rocky, slippery and dangerous. Over the pass, down through a forest and beyond, the spiritual leader of Tibet was offered asylum in India. The Dalai Lama settled in the city of Dharamsala, he and his followers moulding an area now known as Little Lhasa, and so began more than half a century of exile.
Oh boy! So how do we get your book? How can we get your book?
Yeah, you buy it in a bookshop, maybe.
Okay, that's what I want to know.
The bookshop is one place. I'm sure you can get it on the internet. It's called An Atlas of Countries That Don't Exist. I am Nick Middleton. The book is published in the US by Chronicle Books.
It's a wonderful book.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Nick. We really
not at all. Glad we overcame those things.
Yeah, me too. Thank goodness for Skype.
Exactly so.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's take and see you next week on Writers' Voices.